A disaster that led to a prison sentence. A Carlsbad self-help guru running sweat lodge retreats, which killed 3 people.
Were people allowed to leave if they wanted to leave?
The 5th round, someone was passed out. The door is now closed. This round has begun, and we will deal with that at the end of this round.
And tonight, James Arthur Ray is seeking redemption.
But our 10 News anchor Lindsay Pena talked to a former client of his who says he shouldn't be trying to profit from his self-help tragedy.
About 11:30 that night, we were told that Kirby and James had passed away. And we never saw James Ray ever again.
According to cult expert Stephen Hassan, there are 4 types of cults that are common in modern Western society. On this channel, I have already covered a few of the religious cults, but there are also commercial cults, political cults, and self-help cults. Self-help cults can be particularly insidious, with most members unaware they are engaging in cult-like behavior. Self-help gurus often target educated, successful, and wealthy clients who can afford to spend thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars to attend conferences and luxury retreats. These clients are business owners, white-collar professionals, and even celebrities. Though empowered by their positions at the top of society, these clients can be even more vulnerable than most, since they often believe they are impervious to the tactics of cult manipulation. They would never fall for the endless guilt trips of a Warren Jeffs, and would probably walk out of a Bill Gothard IBLP conference. They aren't about to turn over all their wealth and move to a compound. They are savvy and skeptical people. Yet educated, wealthy people often do fall prey to gurus who give passionate talks using psychobabble mixed with Deepak Chopra's misunderstanding about quantum physics and the so-called law of attraction. New Age self-help gurus often sell the promise that you can have anything you desire if you wish hard enough, that you can manifest your wildest dreams out of thin air. It worked for me, they will eagerly tell their audiences, but they leave out the part about how what they desired was to talk you out of your money. And while you may leave the conference or retreat feeling better about yourself, the effects are not likely to last, ensuring that you will soon need another conference or retreat to rejuvenate your positive mindset. So what, you might be thinking to yourself? Who really gets hurt from wealthy people spending their own money? Many of us even get a bit of schadenfreude at the thought of the super rich being taken advantage of. It's easy to overlook the fact that self-help gurus use all the same tactics as religious cults to lure in their clientele. Some gurus do less damage than others. For example, I doubt anyone has died at a Rachel Hollis conference, but that doesn't mean her speeches pushing toxic positivity haven't harmed people. Other gurus are far more dangerous. Today, I will be talking about one such guru, a man named James Arthur Ray. Though born in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1957, James spent his childhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. His father, Gordon Ray, was an evangelical preacher who ran a very strict church. Gordon was popular among congregants for his fire and brimstone sermons, which he delivered with conviction and charisma. The family believed in spiritual healing, refusing medical care and choosing to pray instead. James' mother, Joyce, was particularly strict according to James' brother, John. She considered pinball to be sinful because you could win a free game if you played well, and she considered that to be gambling. One predictor that a person may be vulnerable to extremist thinking is if they have held extreme beliefs in the past. It's not uncommon for someone to escape one type of cult, only to fall prey to another soon after. James was raised around some pretty dangerous beliefs, and it seems that some of the magical thinking from his childhood spilled over into his self-help career. Childhood friends remember James as ambitious, disciplined, and reserved. Though the family was too poor to even afford a basic trim at the barbershop, his classmates recalled that James dressed well and that he seemed to just know that he would be successful one day. Perhaps he believed this because his mother told him from infancy that he had a special calling, a fact she now reflects on with regret. After dropping out of junior college, James discovered his gift for parting people from their money in a telemarketing sales job. In the early 90s, he began his career as a motivational speaker, though he was using the writings of other self-help gurus, including the author of the best-selling book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. James eventually created his own company, James Ray International, which he ran from Las Vegas. Like all successful self-help gurus, James eventually penned his own books. Nothing sells self-help conferences like a book tour. The Science of Success and Practical Spirituality, How to Use Spiritual Power to Create Tangible Results, were both published in 2003. In 2008, he published Harmonic Wealth, The Secret to Attracting the Life You Want. The 7 Laws of True Wealth, Create the Life You Desire and Deserve, was released in 2009. Trying to read out that word salad almost broke my brain. James Ray's teachings have been described as, quote, a mix of spirituality, motivational speaking, and quantum physics. Or, as Andrew Gumbel called it in an article for The Guardian, quantum flapdoodle. James is an advocate for the New Thought movement, which teaches that positive thought can heal or prevent physical ailments. He has gone as far as to say that he uses positive thinking to stay free of any bodily disease. He's 64 now, so we'll see how that holds up in the coming years. James was successful, becoming one of the top 10 self-help gurus in the United States. People would pay hundreds to attend his conferences and thousands to attend luxury retreats, some lasting up to 8 days. During these retreats, James led his followers through some of the typical motivational exercises like board breaking with their bare hands, zip lines, and walking over hot coals. What made James different was his less than conventional exercises like sleep deprivation, extended fasting, and sweat lodge ceremonies, or at least his version of them. Sweat lodge ceremonies are a Native American spiritual practice. Only those raised around the tradition who apprentice with older tribe members are permitted to hold these ceremonies. James Ray had no such qualifications, and his use of the practice was criticized by Native practitioners. James was eventually sued by a Lakota tribe for his misuse and representation of the sacred ceremony, though the case was eventually dropped. In 2006, James hit a stroke of luck appearing on the Larry King Live show to promote his book and seminars. He later made an appearance on Oprah, The Ellen DeGeneres Show, and was even featured as one of the gurus in the 2006 documentary, The Secret. Despite his meteoric rise, there were warning signs that safety was not a top priority for James Ray. At an event held at Walt Disney World in 2005, a woman broke her hand and wrist in multiple places while trying to break a board without proper training. During another event in 2005, a 42-year-old man needed emergency treatment after falling unconscious in a sweat lodge ceremony. In 2006, a man was injured in a spiritual warrior exercise, requiring participants to put the sharp end of an archery arrow up to the soft part of their necks and lean against the tip. What could possibly go wrong, right? Well, the arrow shaft snapped in half, causing the arrow to slip and lodge itself deep in the man's eyebrow. Worse was still to come. In July of 2009, a woman was attending a seminar in which participants were instructed to cosplay as homeless people and wander the streets of San Diego. The woman went missing during the exercise, and it was discovered that she had taken her own life at the Horton Plaza Mall. While her death can't be directly tied to James' teachings, it points to an environment that was not sensitive to the vulnerable state that some people may be in when they seek out self-help and motivational seminars. Seemingly undaunted by the tragedy, James continued to host events that included the highly criticized sweat lodge ceremony.
Oh, there's a big surprise! That's an incredible... I think I'm gonna have a heart attack and die from that surprise!
In October of 2009, he hosted an exclusive seminar near Sedona, Arizona. Participants who paid nearly $10,000 to attend were led through what James called a vision quest. This included a 36-hour fast during which they were to sleep outside exposed to the Arizona desert, where temperatures fall dangerously low at night. They were given only a small sleeping bag unless they opted to pay an extra $250 for a Peruvian poncho. When they returned from their uncomfortable night, it was time for the sweat lodge ceremony. Though they were given a large breakfast a few hours before, it later emerged that participants had not had water for nearly 2 days. It was a recipe for disaster. Participants were told that the sweat lodge ceremony would be the culmination of the retreat. It was a symbolic rebirth, with the hot, steamy lodge representing the womb, I guess. Kind of gross imagery if you ask me, but I'm not a spiritual guru, so what do I know? The idea is that when you emerge from the lodge, you will be reborn, free of whatever emotional blocks were in your way of achieving success and happiness. Now, what James called a ceremony is probably better categorized as a dangerous heat endurance test that bore no resemblance to the original purpose of the Native American ceremony. Participants were packed in like sardines under a plastic-covered dome of sleeping bags and blankets held up by wooden branches. It was makeshift at best. After being herded into the sweat lodge and told to get down on the floor and huddle close together, the door, made from a heavy comforter, was pulled closed, and the torturous process began. To create and increase the heat, fire-hot rocks were added in under the dome of blankets. Temperatures soared with little ventilation. Some of the participants began to panic immediately, but James pushed them to dig deep and find a way to get through it. Their fearless leader kept adding rocks, making it hotter and hotter. People were already pressed up against each other, and then he dumped water all over the rocks, and it filled the lodge with hot steam and scalded the skin, nostrils, and mouths of some of the people who were close by. At this point, several people were in obvious distress and even crying out. Eventually, some of the participants had had enough and tried to leave, but James was stationed at the door, and he goaded them to continue and endure. He claims he was doing what they paid him to do by motivating and even pushing them. He had done this ceremony many times before, after all. Most people chose to stay and continue to endure the heat. For some, it would be a decision with fatal consequences. James kept adding rocks. One round of heat, and then another, and then another. During the 7th round, he was allegedly made aware that one of the participants had become unconscious and was not moving or even breathing. According to a survivor, James replied that he would deal with it after the round was over. When the ceremony finally ended, 3 of the participants did not emerge with the rest and were found unconscious inside. Others had managed to crawl out, only to pass out on the ground just outside the door. It was a scene of chaos and confusion. 911 was called to the retreat center, where it was clear that a tragedy had unfolded. 2 of the participants were declared dead on arrival to the hospital. Another died a few days later. Many others sustained burns and other injuries, but were able to recover. As soon as the deaths were announced, the Arizona retreat became a crime scene. Detectives wanted to talk to the man of the hour, but James Arthur Ray was not at the scene helping victims like everyone else. Oh no, James, later claiming he was in shock, had gone back to his room and taken a shower while the chaos was unfolding outside.
I'm on break.
When informed that he was being investigated for a potential homicide case, he immediately made a call to his lawyer. He claims that his lawyer got him in touch with a criminal lawyer who advised him to leave the scene immediately rather than cooperate with law enforcement. So off he went, leaving the people who had paid him nearly $10,000 to fend for themselves. During their time in the retreat, participants had bonded over their shared ordeals, and they were devastated to learn of the deaths of their new friends. After extensive interviews with police, participants remained at the retreat center and cared for each other one final night before they departed for home. But James Arthur Ray never showed. Shortly after, news broke that James Ray had hosted a conference call with some of the survivors, and one of those survivors had recorded the call. He captured James claiming to be a channeler who had spoken to the dead participants, and that they were, quote, having so much fun outside of their bodies that they had simply chosen not to return to life. Ew. This caught the attention of the U.S. Department of Justice as well as the Federal Trade Commission. The life and career of James Arthur Ray was about to implode. On the 3rd of February 2010, James was arrested and charged with 3 counts of manslaughter by the state of Arizona. He was found guilty of negligent homicide in June of 2011. While awaiting sentencing, James allowed television cameras into his Beverly Hills home, where he was filmed whining about having to sell his dream home and liquidate his assets. Despite being sentenced to 2 years in prison in November of 2011, James has never truly taken responsibility for what happened. He still seems baffled that people don't just let him off the hook because his intentions were good. But it's hardly surprising that James Ray has a shaky grasp on the concept of reality when he has famously said, quote, I fully know, for me, that there is no blame. Every single thing is your responsibility, and nothing is your fault, because every single thing that comes to you is a gift, a lesson. Is that right, James? Explain how dying of hyperthermia on the floor of a sweat lodge is a gift and a lesson. His self-centered take on the tragic sweat lodge experience is an insult to the memory of the people who lost their lives. James was released from prison in July of 2013, and by November, he had already relaunched his self-help business, appearing on the CNN show Piers Morgan Live. It turns out that Piers and James share the same manager, which is probably why James was permitted to appear on the show without any other guests to challenge his controversial statements about the sweat lodge incident. In 2016, James agreed to participate in a CNN documentary called Enlighten Us: The Rise and Fall of James Arthur Ray, and proved that he had still learned nothing over the years. When asked by the documentary's director how he could have caused those deaths, James callously replied, "It had to happen because it was the only way I could experience and learn and grow through the things I've done." Wait, 3 innocent people had to die so James could learn and grow? I can see now why his mother regrets making him feel so special and important as a child. James has a serious case of main character syndrome, going on to say, "You come out of a situation like this and you're either bitter and angry, or you're more awake and grateful, and I choose awake and grateful. And I choose to see it as a test of character and a test through fire, and I think I did okay."
Holy shit, dude.
Few people express their delusions of grandeur quite as brazenly as James Arthur Ray. It is probably that shamelessness which allows him to continue plugging his books, conferences, and seminars. These days, he focuses on themes of redemption and self-forgiveness. Though he occasionally scores a speaking gig at an MLM conference, James is unlikely to ever achieve the heights of success he had reached before the sweat lodge incident, and that is the only thing I can take away from this story to be grateful for. I save my admiration for the survivors of the retreat who had to relive their nightmare during James Ray's trial and somehow move on with their lives after the trauma and grief. Many felt a sense of betrayal. They had looked up to James as a mentor and teacher, and when they needed him the most, he fled and lawyered up. James Arthur Ray is not the only self-help guru who has been convicted of causing deaths during a sweat lodge ceremony. In 2011, a New Age guru from Quebec named Gabrielle Frechette led a sweat lodge ceremony which resulted in the deaths of 3 other people. Frechette, along with 2 others who helped run the ceremony, were convicted of criminal negligence and each spent 6 months in a Canadian prison. Frechette was released with the condition that she could not host her New Age esoteric retreats during her probationary period. I'm sure the families of the victims in both cases were not thrilled about the short sentences these gurus received. But it is hard to make the legal argument that there was intent to harm when the event is supposed to be all about helping people. While motivational conferences and wellness retreats can be a great tool to support emotional and mental health, it is important to check the credentials of speakers and teachers. Many push unscientific and even dangerous ideas and practices, sometimes at the same conferences as qualified speakers who have information that has been researched and vetted. Sure, part of success is a strong and focused dream and desire, but simply putting a wish into the universe won't make you successful. It takes a combination of ambition, work, and a big pinch of dumb luck to reach the top of most competitive fields. And sure, feats of strength, courage, or determination can make you feel empowered, but that empowerment can be achieved through safer accomplishments. If you're going to invest in a luxury retreat, I suggest you stick to walking over hot coals, hosted by a trained professional, and make sure you stay hydrated while you're doing it. As always, I hope you have a fantastic day or night, and I will catch you next time.